I caught my dad dating my aunt while mom's body was still warm. Now karma has hit him, and he's homeless. I never thought I'd be writing about this, but recent events have made me look back at everything that happened 15 years ago. My mom had been battling lung cancer for almost 2 years. The doctors had tried everything, but in the end, we lost her. I was only 19 then, living at home with my dad while taking classes at the local community college. During mom's illness, our whole family came together to support her. My aunt, mom's younger sister, was especially helpful. She'd come to every doctor's appointment, stayed overnight at the hospital, and helped us manage everything. She was divorced and lived about 20 minutes from us with her 2 teenagers who were a bit older than me. Her ex-husband was some big shot in real estate, so she had a comfortable life from the settlement. The first few months after mom passed were tough. Dad seemed lost, which was expected. What wasn't expected was how he started disappearing for hours without telling me where he was going. At first, I thought he was just trying to cope with his grief, maybe spending time with his friends or going to support groups. But his excuses didn't add up. He'd say he was meeting friends who I knew were out of town or going to places that were closed. I started getting worried about him. He'd come home late, sometimes smelling like he'd had a few drinks. When I'd ask where he'd been, he'd give vague answers or change the subject. This went on for about 3 months, and I noticed he was getting more secretive with his phone too. He'd walk away to take calls or quickly hide his screen when I walked by. After about 3 months of this weird behavior, I decided to follow him one day. I know it sounds bad, but I was worried about him. That's when I discovered he was visiting my aunt. The first time I followed him, I thought maybe he was just getting support from family. But then I followed him a few more times and noticed patterns. He'd always park his car a block away from her house. He'd bring flowers or wine sometimes. They'd sit close on the porch swing in the evenings. What made this especially painful was how much my aunt had helped during mom's illness. She had been like a second mother to me during that time. I remembered how she'd bring home-cooked meals to the hospital, how she'd sit with mom for hours so I could go to class or dad could go to work. Finding out about her relationship with my dad felt like being stabbed in the back twice. I couldn't just let it go without confronting them. So one afternoon, I went to her house and rang the doorbell. When she opened the door, I could tell from her face that she knew why I was there. I walked in and found my dad sitting in the living room. They tried to act casual at first, like this was just a normal family visit. But I didn't let them pretend. The truth came out then. They'd been seeing each other since mom was diagnosed. They claimed they didn't want to upset mom in her final months, which is why they kept it secret. Dad tried to explain himself, saying he couldn't handle watching mom suffer and my aunt had been there to support him. One thing led to another, and they fell in love. He actually expected me to understand and accept this. I lost it completely. I said things I probably shouldn't have, called them both horrible people, and stormed out. My aunt tried to grab my arm as I left, saying we should talk about this calmly, but I pulled away. I remember her kids were coming home from school just as I was leaving. They looked confused seeing me there, probably wondering why I was crying and rushing to my car. That evening, when Dad came home, instead of apologizing, he lectured me about following him around and said I needed to apologize for my behavior at my aunt's house. He said I was acting childish and needed to understand that adults sometimes find comfort in unexpected places. He even had the nerve to say that mom would have wanted him to be happy. I refused to apologize and told him I was going back to college. I had taken a break to help during mom's illness, but now I saw no reason to stay. I packed my bags that night and stayed with my friend Sarah until I could arrange to go back to school. Sarah had lost her dad to cancer a few years before, so she understood what I was going through. She let me cry and rant without judgment. A few weeks later, Dad sent me an email saying he was selling our house and moving in with my aunt. He said that since I hadn't apologized or tried to accept their relationship, it would be better if we didn't see each other for a while. My aunt and her kids didn't want me visiting their house, and he agreed with them. He didn't even try to defend me. The house where I grew up, where all my memories with mom were, would be sold to strangers. Thankfully, my parents and grandparents had set up a college fund for me that I could access since I was 18. After graduating, I immediately found a job because I didn't want to depend on anyone anymore. I was hoping Dad would eventually realize his mistake and come back, but that never happened. When their relationship became public, everyone in mom's family cut them off. Even my grandparents stopped talking to their daughter. My grandparents became my biggest support system. They'd have me over for Sunday dinners, help me furnish my first apartment, and were there for every important moment in my life. They seemed as disgusted by Dad and my aunt's behavior as I was. Dad and my aunt moved away after that, and I lost track of them. I heard through distant relatives that they'd moved to a smaller town a few hours away, but I never tried to find out more. For 10 years, there was no contact between us. I built my own life, focused on my career, and met someone special in college who later became my boyfriend. We've been together for 8 years now, and he's been incredibly understanding about my family situation. Then, out of nowhere, Dad called me last month. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when he called again, I picked up. His voice sounded different, older, weaker somehow. He said he desperately needed my help. Apparently, he'd been living in a retirement home for the past 3 months because my aunt and her kids had kicked him out. The comfortable life they'd built together had fallen apart, and now he had nowhere else to turn. Dad went on to explain everything that had happened in the past 10 years. After they moved away, things were good for a while. My aunt's kids, who were in their mid-20s by then, would visit them regularly. But there was always an issue with money. Every time they visited, they'd ask for money, sometimes for their rent, sometimes for a new car, or to start a business. At first, Dad didn't mind helping out. He had his own business that was doing well, and my aunt had her alimony. But over time, the requests got bigger. Her son wanted to open a restaurant despite having no experience. Her daughter needed money to invest in crypto because her friends were doing it. Dad said it felt like they were treating him and my aunt like an ATM. He told me how he finally put his foot down last year. He told my aunt they needed to stop giving her kids so much money. They were adults now and needed to learn to handle their own finances. This caused a huge fight between them. My aunt insisted that parents should always support their children, no matter what. She said Dad wouldn't understand because he had abandoned his only child, me. That comment started more arguments between them. Dad said he began to realize how much he had messed up with me. But instead of reaching out to make amends, he just felt guilty and threw himself into his work. Then the pandemic hit, and his business started struggling. The money wasn't flowing as easily anymore, but my aunt's kids didn't understand that. 2 months ago, they came to Dad and my aunt with a new business idea. They wanted to start an online fitness company and needed startup money. They were asking for almost all of Dad's savings. He refused, saying he needed to keep some money for retirement. My aunt got angry and sided with her kids. After weeks of fighting, she told Dad to leave. The house was in her name, and they had never married, so he had no legal right to stay there. Her kids arranged for him to stay in a retirement home, saying they would pay for it. But now they were using it as leverage. They gave him an ultimatum. Either he invests in their business, or they'll stop paying for the retirement home and demand he pay back what they've already spent on his stay there. I know I have no right to ask you for help, Dad said on the phone. But I have nowhere else to go. Everyone thinks I'm well off because of my business, but the truth is, I've been struggling. I can't afford what they're asking for, and I can't afford my own place right now while trying to keep my business running. I told him I needed time to think about it. Really, I just wanted to get off the phone. Hearing his voice brought back all the hurt and anger I had tried to forget. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, just thinking about everything. The next few days were tough. I couldn't focus at work. My boyfriend noticed something was wrong and asked about it. When I told him everything, he listened without judgment but didn't tell me what to do. He said it was my decision to make. I decided to block Dad's number. I didn't want to deal with this mess. I had my own life now, my own plans. My boyfriend and I were talking about getting married next year. We were saving up for our future. I didn't want to get pulled back into my dad's drama. But then my grandparents got involved. Dad had reached out to them after I blocked his number. To my surprise, they started defending him. They said I should help him, at least let him stay with me until he figures something out. This was shocking because they had been the ones who told me never to forgive him or my aunt. When I refused, they started making me feel guilty. They said I was being heartless, that everyone deserves a second chance. I couldn't understand their sudden change of heart. These were the same people who had cut off all contact with their own daughter because of what she did. I tried explaining to them that I had my own life now. I was busy with work, planning my future with my boyfriend, and saving up for our wedding. I couldn't just let Dad move in with me. What would happen after? Would he expect to stay forever? Would my aunt and her kids start causing problems in my life too? My grandparents wouldn't listen to reason. They kept pushing, saying family should help family. I got frustrated and asked them why they couldn't help him if they felt so strongly about it. They had a spare room in their house. They were financially stable. Why did it have to be me? They started making excuses about how it would be awkward because of what he did to their daughter. I pointed out that he had done the same thing to me, betrayed my trust, and chosen my aunt over me. Why was it okay for them to refuse him, but not for me? That led to a huge argument. They called me selfish and unforgiving. I was so tired of it all that I just asked them to leave. Since then, they've been giving me the cold shoulder. The people who were my biggest support for the past 10 years are now acting like I'm the bad person in this situation. My boyfriend tries to support me, but he travels a lot for work, so I'm often alone with my thoughts. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being too harsh. But then I remember how Dad didn't defend me when my aunt and her kids banned me from their house. I remember how he sold our family home without even discussing it with me. I remember 10 years of silence from his end, broken only because he needs something from me now. It's strange how life works. For years, I wished Dad would reach out, try to make things right. Now that he has, I realize it's not because he wants to fix our relationship. It's because he needs something from me. Maybe I am being heartless, but I don't want to help someone who only remembered I existed when they ran out of options. Update. It's been 6 months since I last heard from my family. 6 months of focusing on my dreams without guilt or interruption. My security consulting business is now up and running. We've got an office, a team of 5 people, and 15 clients already signed up. Last week, I was in a meeting with a potential client when my brother tried to contact me again. He'd made a LinkedIn profile and sent me a connection request with a message saying he'd changed, that he'd gotten a job at a phone repair shop and was trying to turn his life around. I didn't respond. Maybe he had changed, but I wasn't ready to let him back into my life. The last time I believed things could be different, it ended with him showing up at my door after assaulting someone. Some mistakes you only need to make once. My mom found new ways to reach me too. She got her friend from church to come to my office, pretending to be interested in our security services. When I walked into the meeting room and saw her sitting there, I nearly lost it. I had to ask my business partner Jake to handle the situation while I left through the back door. That night, I got an email from Mom. She wrote that my brother had been seeing a therapist, that he'd admitted he was jealous of my success all these years, that he felt like a failure compared to me, which was why he never tried hard at anything. She said he was different now, that he wanted to make things right. Part of me wanted to believe it. Part of me wanted to reply and give them another chance. But then I remembered something my friend Alex told me years ago when I first moved away from home. He said, people who only reach out when they need something aren't trying to maintain a relationship. They're trying to maintain access to your resources. He was right. In all these months, neither Mom nor my brother had apologized for how they treated me growing up. They hadn't acknowledged missing my graduation or cutting me off for 10 years. They just wanted me to forget all that and help them again. 2 weeks ago, I ran into Jenny at a conference in her city. I was there to give a presentation about cybersecurity for small businesses. She came up to me during the lunch break, looking very different from how I remembered her in high school. She was wearing a business suit and had a company badge. We ended up talking over coffee. She told me what really happened that day with my brother. Yes, she had been seeing someone else, but that was because my brother had been lying to her. He'd told her he was a successful game developer working from home. She only found out he was unemployed and living with our parents when she overheard him talking to Mom on the phone. When she confronted him about it, he made excuses, said he was working on a big project that would make him rich. She tried to break up with him then, but he threatened to hurt himself if she did. That's why she started seeing her coworker. She wanted my brother to catch her and end things himself. Hearing her side of the story made me realize how little I actually knew about my brother's life. All these years, I'd been the villain in their story, the selfish sibling who abandoned the family. But I never got to tell my side. They never wanted to hear it. Last month, I got invited to speak at my old university's engineering department. They wanted me to talk about my journey from graduation to starting my own company. As I stood at the podium, looking at all those young faces, I thought about how different my life could have been if I'd kept trying to please my family. After the talk, a student asked me what was the most important decision I'd made in my career. Without hesitating, I said, learning when to walk away. The room got quiet, and I explained that sometimes the hardest choices aren't between right and wrong, but between what others want from you and what you need for yourself. Yesterday, Mom tried to reach me again, this time through my company's official email. She wrote that my brother's girlfriend had broken up with him, and he was depressed, that he needed his siblings' support now more than ever. That Dad would want me to help him. I started typing a reply several times. I wanted to ask why they never supported me when I needed it, why they missed my graduation, why they only contacted me when Dad was dying, why they thought it was fair to make me responsible for my brother's life. But in the end, I didn't send anything. Some questions don't need answers anymore. Some wounds don't need to be reopened. Sometimes silence is the best response. My business is growing faster than I expected. We're planning to open a second office next year. Jake says we might need to hire more people soon. My old college friends Alex and Sarah just had their first baby, and they asked me to be the godparent. I'm building the life I always wanted, surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. People who celebrate my successes instead of making me feel guilty for them. People who show up when I need them, not just when they need something from me. Sometimes I still dream about my dad and that promise I made. In the dreams, I'm back in that hospital room, but this time I tell him the truth. I tell him that I can't keep sacrificing my life to fix my brother's mistakes. That real family doesn't make you choose between your dreams and their needs. I don't know if that would have changed anything. Maybe he would have understood. Maybe he would have been disappointed. But I've learned that you can't live your life trying to make other people happy at the cost of your own happiness. The other day, I found an old family photo while cleaning out my closet. It was from our high school graduation, before everything fell apart. We were all smiling at the camera, looking like a perfect family. I thought about framing it, but instead, I put it back in the box. That family doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it never did. What I have now is different. It's chosen family, built on mutual respect and genuine care, not obligation and guilt. It's friends who became family, colleagues who became friends, and a life that's finally, truly my own.